I know that was very quiet, but if you were listening carefully, what you just heard was a little selection from a composition for wind ensemble that was written about 7 years ago. It was written for an occasion, but if you listened to that piece, that entire piece, that has no lyrics, that is just instruments, you would probably not guess what the occasion was. Themes develop, instruments come in and out, it gets a little disco-y at the end, but you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know from listening to it what it was written for. And yet, that piece, that little piece that we listen to so quietly, is apparently so controversial that when a high school wind ensemble in Wisconsin decided to play it for their spring concert, decided in the fall to play it for their spring concert, the band director had to send a letter home to parents, letting them know that they could opt their kids out from playing the clarinet or the saxophone or the oboe on it. 3 students opted out. No parents really complained. And so this wind ensemble practiced. They rehearsed. They worked on this. And then, 6 days before the concert, the school board of this little town in Wisconsin that sits between Madison and Milwaukee held a vote and removed that piece from the program. Because that piece was composed by Omar Thomas and commissioned by the Desert Winds Freedom Band to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which was a set of protests and riots that started during a police raid on the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village. It is called Mother of a Revolution, and it commemorates one of the people who started that uprising. That started that uprising to protest police violence against the LGBTQ community in Greenwich Village 50 years ago, at this point 57 years ago. That was apparently so controversial, this instrumental piece that has to do with that event, that is vaguely related to that event, that a school board had to tell a band director who had done what he was supposed to do and had to tell kids who had done what they were supposed to do that no, they were not going to be allowed to play it. This school board, which I assume did tremendous amounts of research into every other piece of music that has ever been part of a high school band concert. I assure you, some of them get weird. The board vice president said that the decision to pull that music reflects the platform board members campaigned on. This is the quote. "This is a perfect example of what everyone here ran on, which was ending indoctrination and radical curriculum. We are not going to have such crazy music that commemorates an event from 57 years ago, has a drum set, and has parallel fifths." And the kids responded to this. The kids, last week, walked out of class to protest this action of the school board. The kids who had showed up for band practice, the kids who had worked on this piece, the kids who had stood in front of the school board and told them that they were wrong, walked out of class to protest. And I'm telling you this because that takes a lot of courage. It takes a tremendous amount of bravery for some high school kids to go to a school board meeting and tell those adults what they think. It takes a tremendous amount of bravery for some high school kids to stand up and walk out of class, exercise their First Amendment rights, to tell a school board and a community what they think. It takes a tremendous amount of bravery to stand up in the face of power, knowing that what you do probably isn't going to change anything today. That piece is not going to go back on the program. It takes a tremendous amount of bravery to do that anyway, in the hopes that one day something will change, and that some other group of students might have the opportunity to perform a wind ensemble piece that is okay. In our reading today, we find Paul in Rome. A couple of weeks and many chapters of Acts ago, Paul was the new guy. He was trying new things. He was going out and preaching to Gentiles. He was spreading the good news among folks who the church did not expect the good news to go to. And he was seeing the Spirit fall on them. Since then, he has gotten in some trouble. He's gotten in trouble with Jewish authorities. He's gotten in trouble with Roman authorities. He's gotten in a little bit of trouble with church authorities. And he has, in all of this trouble, gotten arrested. He has, in all of this trouble, exercised his power as a Roman citizen to demand an appeal to no less a figure than the emperor himself. He has been in custody in one form or another for a long time, as those authorities have transported him to Rome. He's been shipwrecked during this. But finally he has come to Rome. And he's going to be hanging out until the emperor can get around to hearing his appeal, to hearing from Paul that Paul has done nothing wrong. And that's not going to change anything. Paul is not going to get out of this. Paul is not going to walk away free. Paul is not going to get to go to Spain. Paul is not going to get to go back to Jerusalem. Paul is not going to get to go back to Antioch. Paul is going to die. According to legend, Paul is going to be beheaded in Rome after the emperor decides that Paul has to go. And he's going to find very little support. He's going to be on his own. But that's not going to stop him. Paul has to know what is going to happen, but that is not going to stop him. Paul has to know how this is going to go, but that is not going to stop him. He is going to go into the streets of Rome, into the heart of this empire, into this place where he knows the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less hold sway, into this place where the emperor whose troops occupy his homeland rules. He is going to go out into these streets, these country lanes, this urban wilderness, and he is going to spread the good news. The specific of our reading today is that the Jewish community in Rome has come to see him. And they are, unsurprisingly, in the text of the New Testament, not listening very well, not understanding him, certainly not agreeing with him. They are hearing this good news and saying, no, that's not for us. And I don't want to sit on that too much. One of the things that we as Christians have to deal with the early church and with Paul specifically, and often with the text of the New Testament, is a certain amount of anti-Semitism and supersessionism, this idea that somehow Jewish people have been left behind and Christian Gentiles have taken over. And I do need to say that idea is garbage. God's covenant with the Jewish people still stands. God does not break God's covenants. But something new is rising up. Something different is rising up. A new opportunity is showing up. And what was once the province of these Jewish people is now also the province of everyone else. God is bringing good news to all of creation without giving up on the good news that God gave to a chosen people through an ancestor long ago. But Paul does cite Isaiah and points to an old prophecy that yes, there would be folks who would not see, who would not understand, who wouldn't get it, who wouldn't get into it. And Paul tells them that he will go out to the Gentiles, to the Romans, to the occupiers, to the empire, to these folks who could not be further from what Paul believes God wants. Paul is going to go to them and preach good news. Paul is going to go to the heart of empire and tell them that Christ is risen and new things are possible. And even though Paul knows that that's not going to change anything for him, Paul hopes that that just might change things for them. For these folks who live in empire, for these folks who spread empire. And Paul has no idea how much things are eventually going to change. And that takes at least as much bravery as standing up to a school board or walking out of class. Paul is being courageous here. Paul is standing by his conviction. Paul is not wavering for a moment. We sit in many ways, at the heart of empire. We sit in many ways in positions of privilege and power and prestige. We sit in many ways in comfort. We sit in many ways in those places where systems work for us. And yet, we have this good news for other folks. For us, yes, certainly, but also for others. And the thrust of this whole series has been that the Spirit keeps working where we do not expect it to work. The thrust of this whole idea, the thrust of this whole faith, is that the Spirit works in places and among people where we do not expect it to work. That everywhere where we look, where we say it can't possibly be there, the Spirit precedes us. Every time we look at someone and say it couldn't possibly be them, the Spirit is already there. And we who enjoy a certain amount of power, we who enjoy a certain amount of privilege, we who enjoy a certain amount of prestige, we who can appeal directly to the emperor, we who are citizens, we have the opportunity to nurture that Spirit, to grow that Spirit, to witness to that Spirit, and to tell this good news. We can go to the halls of power. We can stand in front of the school board. We can show up for hearings in the Capitol. We can write op-eds. We can shout on social media. We can say all of the things to all of the people and all of the right things to all of the right people. We can go anywhere and say, Christ is risen and new things are possible. We do not have to stay how it has been. We can let the empire fall and God's reign of love rise. And it's true that that might not change anything for us. And there might not be any difference tomorrow. But sharing that good news, opening that possibility, nurturing that Spirit, witnessing to the work of God in the world today, can in fact change things. And at some point in the future, in a time that we don't know, that we cannot see, we might find someone sitting under a tree that we planted and God nurtured, finding themselves welcome in a reign of love, finding themselves included in a reign of love, finding themselves celebrated in a reign of love that they did not know was coming. The promise of the good news, the hope of our faith, the thing that moves us is not that we might see immediate results, although I wish we would. It is that we are nurturing God's reign of love all around us. And that work is worth it. Because even though we might find ourselves afraid, even though we might find ourselves uncomfortable, even though we might find ourselves having to do brave, courageous, slightly bananas things, that reign of love that we are nurturing will blossom. And it will fill all of the earth. And everyone, everywhere, will find a home abiding in the God who is love. And so I say to you, that command that is given again and again and again and again throughout Scripture. Do not be afraid. A command that is only given when there are things to be afraid of. No one says don't freak out unless it's time to freak out. Do not be afraid, but share the good news. Because one day, after all of that fear has been washed away, after every tear has been wiped away, after death itself is past, one day we will awake to God's reign of love all around us and be home, abiding in the God who is love at last.